Chile, a decade-long drought in the capital, Santiago, has gone from bad to worse due to scorching Julys. Officials say that such happenings at the time of the year when the city is usually in rain and snow are clear evidence of global warming. More in this report. A lack of precipitation this year has left the towering and typically snow-capped Andes above Santiago mostly bare, reservoir levels low, and farm fields parched. The city's central weather station recorded just 78 millimeters of rainfall so far this year. It is drastically less than last year's 180 millimeters and an average amount of 252 millimeters.
We are facing the worst hydrological crisis, the worst drought in our history. We are in the 13th year of drought. We have never had more than 4 consecutive years before. This has been the driest period of Chile's history since the start of the registers.
Some scientists and politicians in Chile are warning of growing and potentially irreversible water shortages in the central region. Officials have warned that 2 rivers, the Mapocho and the Maipo, that provide Santiago with water are drier than they were in 2019, the driest year in the country's entire history.
Much of the effects of climate change in the short term and medium term are irreversible. So unfortunately, it is unlikely that the precipitations in Chile's central area of the 80s and 90s will return. That we will recover that type of climate in regards to the temperatures and of extraordinary precipitation. That's unlikely from here on towards the middle of the century.
In a recent report, the United Nations has warned that extreme heat waves, which not long ago struck once every 50 years, are now to be expected once per decade. It said that droughts and downpours might also be much more frequent.
Yeah, normally, we would be a little bit higher, so we're a little bit shorter.
Ian Chitwood considers himself lucky. His canola crop south of Calgary is hanging on, despite a summer of soaring temperatures and little rain.
Overall, we're right in this area, we're okay, but we need some rain soon.
An hour south in Vulcan County, the situation is far more severe. The county has declared a municipal agricultural disaster. Most of the crop in the region has been lost.
This is widespread. I haven't seen many nice crops in southern Alberta, which is surprising. Typically, there's going to be pockets that have received some good rain, but there's really nothing this year.
But Vulcan County is not alone. Drought conditions are breeding desperation for farmers across the country, from BC's interior to eastern Ontario. In Manitoba's Interlake region, normally green grazing pastures used for cattle are dry, brown, and dead, forcing many beef producers in the area to sell the animals they are no longer able to feed.
It's a heart-wrenching circumstance. These are operations that have been in the family for 3 and 4 generations, and they're being forced to make decisions that really undermine the viability of their farm.
Food producers are used to battling the elements in Canada, and Canadian farmers have seen at least 2 other droughts like this in the last 40 years. But
climate change projections are that drought could become more severe, more intense, and more frequent.
That's a problem, not only for farmers, but consumers too. Food prices are already expected to rise this year by an average of 5%, with some items like meat expected to surge even more.
To produce food in general in the fall will likely be more expensive for everyone.
A painful extension of a drought few Canadian farmers have seen before, but will more than likely have to face again. Heather Urex West, Global News, near Airdrie, Alberta.
It's shaping up to be a particularly bad year for the US as far as droughts and its impacts are concerned. According to the US Drought Monitor, already around half the nation is under some form of drought, worst of which denoted by the redder colours here on the chart, particularly to the west and southwest.
It shows the urgency of the moment, shows the urgency of our efforts as we once again prepare for wildfire season here in the state of California.
This is Lake Oroville, California's second largest reservoir. Supplies drinking water to 27 million people, and it's at half its normal levels. The drought has worsened over the last year. Here's the drought map for 2020 in late May. Fast forward to this year, and we now have around a quarter of the state under exceptional drought.
For whatever little water we've gotten in the past, and sometimes we don't get a lot of water, but at least we know what we got. And we can use it when we need it, and we can plan. This year we can't plan because we don't know when we'll get water that we are trying to get for these crops.
Climate change is playing a role, but over the past year, natural factors out in the Pacific have also played their part. La Nina conditions, that's colder waters in the eastern Pacific, have disrupted weather patterns, meaning the normal rain and snow clouds we see across California during the winter have been replaced by high pressure, dry and sunny conditions. And that meant the rainfall amounts have fell well short of expectations. Take Palm Springs and Sacramento. Palm Springs have had less than a fifth of what we normally expect since last July. And that has had an impact on the snowpack. Snowpack supplies around a third of California's drinking and agriculture water. This was the snowpack there in the mountains back in 2019. This year, you could barely capture it on the satellite imagery, around 2% of where it should be. Looking to the summer, rainfall, well, it's going to be a hit and miss across California, but across many western areas, the brown colours here denoting below average rainfall expectations, and it's the same areas where we expect temperatures to be above average, both of those combining to worsen drought conditions and their impacts.
I'm nervous. Last year being the worst fire season on record, this year is definitely shaping up to be even worse.
I think the greatest hope that we can take from where we are right now is that we know what's coming. We also know that this will continue to be a threat and that we need to use the best available science to leverage the solution side of the equation. That is going to involve things like forestry management, water resource management, agricultural best practices, as well as, of course, thinking about the codes that communities use to build out these homes and infrastructure in potentially vulnerable areas. So we have a host of tools to bring to the challenge, and the science could not be clearer. We are late to the game, but it's never too late to begin to think about what we can do to prepare communities for our climate of now and help them be more resilient for our climate of tomorrow.
It's 7 times worse than it was just a year ago. 7 times more children are in trouble. Why? Because of drought. We're facing the worst drought in over 40 years. And this is an area where people depend on their own agriculture, homegrown school meals, smallholder farmers. This is how they live down here. But with drought, back to back to back, people can't survive. And so the government, partnering with the World Food Program and others, we're doing the best we can. But it's a terrible situation.
Itu kami zai di sana ng hanan ketu. Di sana ng mizai la sasang na fahanrun. Tuang mizai zana ngata ti valu vulang hanai ayam jo. Satia zai ti misakaf, ti misirano nurang, di fara mizai zai tuang mizai ti sakaf wanai ay.
Nga hari fai no tira ta za hot misira hot pa kun ra kyang mai kwa fale fai ro no tira ku za le sa sang man le ing ti haning sambai he be za hot misira nda ra ai ni mate tire na yere ni mate ti vali kun te za ze le fi fara le no peta le si tanti ai le tira ke taru ne ti ku za le sa sang le sambai he
COVID-19 has eroded the labor opportunities of people living in the South. So as we know, the South is the region which has been most affected by the current drought. So seasonal labor opportunities have been eroded or taken away from people.
In the middle of a global pandemic, Mexico is living through its worst drought in decades. While 85% of the country is affected, half of Mexico's states are under extreme conditions, with the agricultural industry facing massive shortfalls and worsening drinking water shortages in cities. Sergio Holguín is a cattle rancher in Chihuahua and says he can't carry on much longer.
Hace 35 años que no hacía una sequía como esta.
It's been 35 years since we saw a drought as bad as this one. We've had no help whatsoever from the government. Before, this was my grandfather's land, but if it stays this way, we'll have to leave and go elsewhere. This is our livelihood. We depend on it. If there's no water, there is nothing.
Ahí dependemos, no hay agua, pues no hay nada.
Conditions deteriorated in 2020 when the 5-month wet season failed to live up to its name, and as the country waits for the next stretch of rains to arrive by mid-June, reservoirs across the country are dangerously low. Isidro Cano is a Mexican meteorologist who blames the drought on global warming.
Bueno, es parte de lo que es el tan comentado calentamiento global.
This is all due to the phenomenon of global warming, which has been occurring since the 1980s. The greenhouse effect has brought severe changes to the movement of air flows around our planet, and in Mexico and the southern United States in particular, the increase in flows of warm air from the equator. That's what's causing this severe drought.
Es lo que nos genera esta diversa sequía.
As for the future, without significant action to halt global warming, he sees the long-term situation getting worse.
Entonces, año con año,
year on year, we observe that these effects are becoming more frequent and more severe. We are destroying our planet. That is the reality.
Esa es una realidad.
So far, Mexico is predicting a regular rainy season this year, but with weeks to go before that life-giving water may arrive, Mexico must continue to weather an existence without significant precipitation. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
The pandemic has meant that there is a shortage of workers to harvest crops in Germany, and this is leading to skyrocketing food prices. Cauliflower, broccoli, asparagus and lettuce prices have increased by up to 75%. To add insult to injury, forest fires have dried out the land, and the farmland is on the verge of drought.
Anfang März eigentlich keine Trockenheit, im Gegenteil, die Bodenfeuchte, alles war in Ordnung und innerhalb weniger Wochen hat sich das komplett umgedreht und wir haben jetzt wieder mit Dürre und Trockenheit zu tun. Unsere
More infectious Delta variant of COVID-19 has now been found in most countries in the world, 135 countries to be exact, according to the WHO. On Wednesday, the head of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, called for booster shots to be halted so poorer countries can get their first doses. The U.S. is seeing infections rise again, especially in Florida, which is reporting a record number of hospitalizations, now above 10,000. China is also fighting off the Delta variant, which has spread to more than half of its provinces. Indonesia has become the second country in Asia with a death toll of more than 100,000. Iran has reported a new record number of daily infections at almost 40,000. A new high in Japan, too, now hosting the Olympics. On Wednesday, more than 14,000 cases.
Walaupun sudah mulai ada perbaikan, namun perkembangan kasus COVID-19 masih sangat dinamis dan fluktuatif. Sekali lagi, kita harus terus waspada dalam melakukan berbagai upaya untuk mengendalikan kasus COVID-19 ini.
an urgent reversal from the majority of vaccines going to high-income countries to the majority going to low-income countries. Accordingly, WHO is calling for a moratorium on boosters until at least the end of September to enable at least 10% of the population of every country to be vaccinated.
The World Health Organization has urged stronger action to rein in the Delta outbreak as cases surged by 80% in the past 4 weeks, and more places in Australia were locked down to stop the spread of the variant. Health authorities in Australia are on heightened alert as the COVID crisis in New South Wales worsened. The country's most populous state added 210 cases overnight.
Can I say the Delta variant is partial to younger people as well. It definitely is circulating in the younger community. And I want to stress that of the 210 locally acquired cases, two-thirds, 138 cases, were people under the age of 40 years old.
The mutated strain slipped across border, infecting 6 people in neighboring Queensland. That prompted the strictest lockdown in the northeastern state, as people in 11 local government areas were banned for non-essential travel. The World Health Organization reported that infections have grown by 80% globally over the past 4 weeks.
The one magic dust we do have is vaccination. Problem is, we're not sprinkling that evenly around the world, and we're working against ourselves. So from that perspective, Delta is a warning.
The health agency cautioned that although the Delta strain is not more deadly, countries should step up their COVID response before deadlier variants emerge.
Getting back to their lives, French youth are counting on making the most of their summer after a long spring lockdown at festivals and beaches. But the return of socializing means increased exposure to the Delta variant. The overall COVID infection rate among 18 to 29-year-olds is currently nearly 65 out of every 100,000, more than twice the national average of 24.6. And yet, many French young people seem to feel that a return of the epidemic isn't their concern.
Peut-être que dans 6 mois, je serai vacciné. Je suis entre 2 ans encore.
Youth have now become the prime target in the government's vaccination drive. Thursday morning, French Health Minister Olivier Véran took time for a brief lesson on the benefits of vaccination.
Si je vous dis que le produit, le vaccin, en 2 minutes d'injection, vous êtes protégé quoi qu'il arrive à 95% contre les formes graves du Covid. C'est pas mal.
46% of 18 to 29-year-olds have already gotten 1 dose of the vaccine. To boost that trend, this infectious disease specialist recommends seeking out the young on summer holidays.
Pour parler à ces jeunes et les capter pour la vaccination, très clairement, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est la délocaliser, installer des barnums sur les plages, dans les villes, au plus près de cette jeunesse, avec des symboles, des Instagrammeurs, des footballeurs de l'Euro, des gens qui vont leur signer des autographes et qui vont parler à cette jeunesse.
That strategy of on-location vaccination is already underway at several beachfront destinations. But as of now, only 1/5 of French youths are fully vaccinated.
Some parts of the country, it's like at a quarter of the all new cases within 3 to 4 weeks.
Another COVID-19 variant sinking its teeth into the Canadian landscape. First identified in India and now referred to as the Delta variant by the World Health Organization, the strain has led to a spike in cases in countries like the United Kingdom. Its footprint now accounts for 23% of all Ontario cases.
Estimates are suggesting it can spread 50% better. So that means it's more infectious, and it also means it can take advantages of lapses in our defenses.
Longer term, I'd expect that the dominant number of cases will be from this variant.
Additionally, the Delta variant hits younger people harder.
What we're seeing with this one is that it is having more adverse effects, and the effects are stronger.
This is what unfortunately is driving some of that hospitalization, some of that intensive care unit admission across the country in the third wave.
Research suggests the spread is mostly among unvaccinated people or those with only a single dose. With just 6% of Canadians fully immunized, it means quickly bolstering the firewall.
The second dose of vaccine and the time needed to develop the immune response seems to be extremely protective against Delta when compared to that first dose.
58% of Canadians now have their first dose, and while rates continue to climb, observers believe provinces should ease off the pedal when speeding forward with the reopening plans in hopes of avoiding a fourth wave.
Because of how transmissible it is, we have to then be a bit more cautious about reopening and opening settings where we're going to have people together.
Delta is the fourth variant of concern and has spread to more than 60 countries, some having difficulty containing it. Experts say it's a reminder that even if Canada brings the virus under control here, we can't let our guard down.
New variants will more than likely appear and will appear in Canada. But I don't see this being, the feared variant that is resistant to vaccination. But it is something that we do have to be very respectful of because it spreads quickly.
Scott Frolick, City News, Edmonton.
Now done, I think 80% of adults in this country have had a first jab, and we're now asking 18-year-olds to come forward. So we're making huge progress.
Total nihilism and the low vaccination level were behind the surge. We must also not forget the cunning of the infection itself.
The Delta variant is well on its way to becoming the dominant variant globally because of its significantly increased transmissibility.
In this current outbreak in Australia, the one focused around New South Wales, the largest cluster, they're reporting consistently very close to 100% of close household contacts being infected, and that's quite different to what we've seen previously.
Based on the estimated transmission advantage of the Delta variant and the using modeling forecasts, the ECDC is telling us that 70% of the new infections are projected to be due to this variant in Europe by early August, and 90% of infections will be of this variant by the end of August. So there is clearly a very worrying trend. There is something that compels us to continue being very vigilant.
this point, I figured why not? You got work, you got benefits.
The powerful earthquake in Haiti, where homes were flattened and shops and several other buildings were weakened, has overwhelmed hospitals. At least 1,400 people are known to have died in the 7.2 magnitude earthquake. More than 6,900 were injured and an unknown number are still missing. The quake, centered about 125 kilometers west of the capital of Port-au-Prince, nearly razed some towns. Officials said that the earthquake destroyed more than 7,000 homes and nearly damaged 5,000, leaving over 30,000 families homeless. Hospitals, schools, offices and churches were also destroyed or badly damaged. It also triggered landslides that hampered rescue efforts in a country that is the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. A hospital in southwestern Haiti was so full with patients that many had to lie in patios, corridors, verandas and hallways. Things are likely to get worse, as a tropical depression Grace is expected to dump up to 25 centimeters of rainfall over the worst affected area. It is feared that the deluge could trigger even more landslides. Roads already made impassable by the quake could be further damaged by the rains, so 8 teams are racing to get essential provisions to the quake-hit region. Even before the earthquake, Haiti was already struggling with multiple issues. The coronavirus pandemic, gang violence, worsening poverty and the political uncertainty followed by the earthquake has sent desperate residents rushing to the streets.
Mount Kilauea is showing signs that it might erupt. Yeah, an earthquake swarm started there on Monday night, and by Tuesday morning there had been more than 140. The earthquakes could be a sign that magma is moving around under the volcano. So the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, they upped the volcano alert level to watch. And in this case, that means that the potential for an eruption is there, but there's no way to know exactly when it would happen. Kilauea is one of the most active volcanoes in the world. It destroyed hundreds of homes back in 2018. It was at the tail end of an eruption that lasted more than 30 years.
Elsewhere around the world, a powerful 8.2 magnitude earthquake struck Alaska on Wednesday night local time. It was Alaska's strongest earthquake in more than 5 decades. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the quake was located about 800 kilometers from Anchorage with a relatively shallow depth of 35 kilometers. It was followed by a series of aftershocks. 2 were above magnitude 6.0. Residents in Kodiak Island were advised to evacuate to higher ground. Tsunami warnings were issued for the coastal areas of South Alaska, the Alaska Peninsula, Hawaii and Guam, but were later lifted.
Parks, Jed, scientists say July was a really shaky month at Yellowstone. The U.S. Geological Survey shows more than 1,000 minor quakes around the park last month, the most at the national park since June of 2017. Most were in swarms. Apparently that's how a lot of these happen. And one huge swarm was below Yellowstone Lake.
Yeah, really crazy stuff. They always get a ton of earthquakes. Thankfully, they're all small, though.
Yeah.
Communities in the Congo are on edge after an earthquake raised fears of another volcanic eruption. Seismic activity started after Mount Nyiragongo blew on Saturday, and by Tuesday morning, the tremors were coming like clockwork. A 4.7 magnitude quake rattled nerves and buildings in the city of Goma, just 12 miles from Mount Nyiragongo. The quake reportedly damaged buildings and left cracks in the roads. Authorities are working to determine whether anyone was hurt. Goma was spared the worst of Saturday's eruption. It sent rivers of lava into communities around the city, destroying hundreds of homes. The death toll from the eruption has risen to more than 30. About 30,000 families were forced to evacuate, and although some have returned, government officials say areas are not safe yet. So those families could be in limbo until the tremors stop.
Agency officials in Japan said that hundreds of earthquakes occurred in waters near Tokara Islands. Ria Saito has the details.
Japan's meteorological agency disclosed that hundreds of earthquakes hit near the waters of Tokara Islands in the southwestern Kagoshima prefecture since Friday. Agency officials disclosed that there were 199 earthquakes on the island chain located in Toshima Village, Kagoshima Prefecture, with an intensity of 1 and higher from Friday midnight until 6:30 on Monday morning. There were also 3 or 4 shocks recorded on the Japanese intensity scale of 0 up to 7 magnitude on the island of Akosekejima and other areas. In the past, earthquake swarms have occurred in waters close by the island chain that lasted for several days. Meanwhile, government officials also asked the residents in the island to be alert and cautious since the occurrence of the earthquakes may last for some time. Ijo, Nihon kara Saito Rian News o tsutai shimashita. SMNI News, Japan.
First, that it's hard not to feel like our country is having a run of bad luck when you have an earthquake, tsunami alert and pandemic to contend with all in one day.
I was sitting in maths class and we just got the alert, and then all the students from our school came to the hill quite calm and quietly, which was real good.
So we all evacuated, and it took us probably about 20 minutes to get our whole school up here.
That'd be the worst full moon tide ever and some, so it's really cranking.
I was so scared. Me and my friend were kind of panicking, but everyone was just saying it's fine because we were already in land.
Once people sort of congregated together and we started to cordial with each other, I think it was quite a relaxed atmosphere.
The eruption is going to happen most likely just beyond that ridge.
So since midnight today, it's been 1,200 earthquakes, and in a normal week you might have 100, 200.
Yeah, so it's right over there, the triangular, so we should be able to see when the eruption starts. Many people have woken up by earthquakes. We've had several over magnitude 5, so this has been very unusual, and I don't think anyone remembers anything like this happening.
Everybody's feeling a little bit like they've been out to sea, really, a little bit giddy. But it's stressful, and it's most stressful for the people who live close to the active areas.
Driving slightly towards the active area, so behind the ridges we could expect an eruption soon.
Iceland is used to volcanic eruptions, but there hasn't been one in this area so close to the capital for hundreds and hundreds of years, and so it's that's making people a bit nervous. You can see the ground out in front of us is covered in old lava that's been here now for more than 1,000 years.
The activity is on the other side of this ridge, so we're in a safe spot here. The magma is now at 1 kilometer's depth in the crust, and that's very shallow, so we can expect that to find its way up to the surface.
So what sort of eruption are you expecting?
We're not going to see, like we saw in 2010, a central volcano with an explosive eruption and then a lot of ash. That's not the case for Reykjanes here. There are plenty of cracks in the roads around the area. It's not a lot, but it just shows us how powerful Mother Nature actually is.
How much warning will you get before an eruption?
We don't know. Hopefully we will get a warning, but it might be a very small signal.
Minutes? Hours?
Minutes, yeah. So that's why we are taking everything so seriously here.
Sutrašnjeg ili ovog tjedna.
For a second straight day, central Croatia rocked by a powerful earthquake. 45 kilometers southeast of the capital Zagreb, the quake hit with a preliminary magnitude of 6.4. The same area was struck by a 5.2 quake just 24 hours earlier. Several smaller aftershocks were felt across the Balkans, as far away as Hungary, and including Slovenia. This video shows the moment MPs in the country's parliament felt the impact. Much of the town at the epicenter of the earthquake, already damaged in Monday's tremor, has been destroyed. The region is prone to earthquakes, and there are greater risks with many shaky old buildings. A dramatic scene unfolding. A man and a child pulled from a car buried under debris. And the military has been called in to help rescue crews and with the cleanup. Local authorities reporting at least 6 people have been killed, but the full extent of casualties and injuries is not yet known. Croatians will begin the healing process amid this devastation in the days and weeks to come. And Tuesday, a year-end message from the UN to the world, acknowledging all of the tragedies of 2020, but looking ahead with hope.
If we work together in unity and solidarity, this rays of hope can reach around the world. That's the lesson of this most difficult year. Both climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic are crises that can only be addressed by everyone together as part of a transition to an inclusive and sustainable future.
Megan Robinson, City News.
Allah! Apartman gitti ya.
situación es que aproximadamente 10-15 kilómetros de lo que es la superficie terrestre hay una capa o una especie de magma. Ese magma se le conoce como el desprendimiento de una placa, que cabía la posibilidad de que naciera un nuevo volcán.
Madrugada, 3, pues da miedo, o sea, se siente un poquito de pánico al saber que pueda pasar o si se va a repetir mientras la gente está dormida. Hemos tenido que dormir como con la puerta de nuestro patio trasero abierta por si llegase a suceder algún incidente, poder salir deprisa.
Pues así de temor que digamos no estamos asustados de eso nada, estamos tranquilos. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos en una zona volcánica, de todos modos, ¿qué hacemos? Nada, no se puede hacer nada, con la naturaleza, con ellos no se puede hacer nada. Si vienen los temblores y si los sintamos, pues hay que tranquilos.